Hey everybody, it's me, Root Beer, and I don't have a fully formed video idea right now, so welcome back to Root Beer rambles about one of his random pet decks for a little bit. This time I'm going to be talking about Liael, because if you've been following our Twitter, you'll know I've been posting about this deck for the last, 2 months or whatever. Like, it's funny because I didn't go into set 2 wanting to play this deck. Like, if you go back to our set review, I was most impressed with Blankmeyer. I thought he was a cool card, and I do like playing just like a big ass guard restrict. I used to like old DI cards like Gilderai or Steeped in Sin Sharhot. So, going into the set, I remember not thinking that much about Liel, and then, Atlas decided he also wanted to play Blankmeyer, and, a bunch of other people at my locals were also building the deck. So, the part of my brain that wants to be a special snowflake, where if everyone else is playing a deck, suddenly I don't want to. And so, I was thinking, well, I still need a deck to play for Constructed Cup, so what else can I do? And I wasn't super feeling anything else out of set 2, so I'm like, alright, guess I'm building this because no one else wants it. And then I just kind of ended up with the deck, I did go 3-0 in that Constructed Cup. Uh, I don't think it was the most impressive thing in the world, even though I keep talking about it, because, one of my opponents decked out and the other one never saw a single Persona ride. So it was like going in, I expected to lose to all the Blankmeyers, and then all of the Blankmeyer players just kind of lost to themselves. But I digress. So I have had a bit of a roller coaster of emotions with this deck. Coming out of set 4, we didn't get any new support for the deck, so I was like, oh, it's so Jover. You know, Future Hikari is no longer relevant in the anime. They're not going to give this deck any new support. And then, thankfully, the GOAT came back for season 2, so we are getting more support in set 5, but it does kind of just have me, thinking about the deck a lot now. Uh, in general, I think Liel as the base of a deck is okay. She's a very flawed card. Needing to have the same name unit after you bind is, kind of difficult. It introduces some ways the deck can just lose to itself, where, oops, I took a name on damage, or, during the Divine Skill, oh, I drove check my name, now I don't have any more in the deck to, bind with. So, the deck is flawed in that capacity, but I think there is another, major flaw with the deck, which is that some names are just better than others, and I think the way the current suite of support has shaked out, the deck is currently just a little too over-centralized around its, one good name, the Sword Saint of Itinerant, Idiras. So, his ability is if you have the same name in the bind zone, he gets 10k, and then when it's bound, you can Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and give the Vanguard 5k. So, Idiras is far and away your best bind target. He becomes a 20k beater, and because you need to have the same name in the bind zone, you want to see him as quickly as you can so you can set it up and get the power going early on. And then, of course, he also gives you, a ton of card advantage, and just the way that the support around Liel has worked out, both in set 2 and all of the new cards coming in set 5, it does feel like this deck has this weird dynamic where, you're intended to bind Idiras, and then all of your other cards just kind of need to, be around when Idiras is bound so that they can gain their benefits. It's weird. So if your other unit was placed on rearguard circle from the deck this turn, it gets power plus 10,000, and it's okay, so it's not a very good bind target in and of itself because it says your other unit. So if you're binding it off of Liel, that doesn't actually trigger the continuous skill, right? A similar thing is happening with Sequence Wizard, a new triple R that we're getting in set 5, where it has the on place, you check top 5 call, but the other ability that we're talking about in relation to Idaros is when your other unit is bound by the Vanguard's ability, then it gets 5k and you may soul charge 1. So there's this weird little dynamic that's going on with cards like Diana and Sequence where it needs to stay on the board to see another card get bound or placed from the deck to gain their power. So there's this dynamic of like, okay, you like want to bind Idiras because he's the most important card, and then you need the other unit to stay on the board to see him get bound. And if you're in a position where you don't have Idiras because it was like retired, or you simply just didn't draw into him, like it feels really bad because suddenly your other bind targets aren't very good either. It feels like the deck doesn't have that kind of flexibility where, a card like Salvar Dragon, if your bind zone has any card with the same name as any of your units, then it gets plus 10k. So it's like, yes, you can use it in the same capacity as Sequence Wizard and Diana, where you keep it off to the side to watch another card get bound. But also, if you choose to bind the Salvar Dragon, like he's gonna have the same name as himself, obviously, so it's gonna get the plus 10k. And I feel like this is something that Liael as a whole is going to need as long as we're working off of like the currently existing card. Obviously, there are ways to improve Liael herself if we're getting new grade 3s, but as it currently stands with the cards we have, I do think we just need more cards like Salvar Dragon that more generally care about just like cards being in the bind zone instead of like the exact same name all the time. Salvar Dragon still isn't even all the way there because you still need to have a card with the same name, but as long as it's any card, it means like there's still a level of flexibility that exists there. So as far as the immediate future for the deck is concerned, it does kind of feel like Bushiroad has largely doubled down on the issue. Like I said, Sequence Wizard kind of lives in the same place that Diana currently does, where it's not a very good bind target itself and kind of needs to just sit off to the side while another better card like Idaros gets bound. They also introduced a worse version of Idiras for some reason, where it's like, okay, if you have the same name, it gets 5k, and then it can bind itself to like draw a card, but it does have a really weird timing where when your Grade 3 or Greater Liel is placed, so it's like either at the start of the ride phase, you like bind it to draw, which creates a different issue where it's like, okay, well, you still need to find two of it, but now like you need to find one to put early to like bind itself, and then you need to find the second copy to have the plus 5k afterwards. And then that's also fewer copies that you can use for like Liel's ability to bind. So especially on the divine skill turn, you can end up in a really awkward position where you don't have enough names to do the divine skill, which is super annoying. I think like Istir, the grade 1, is a step in the right direction for the deck where like it only cares if anything has been bound and then it'll like restand itself to be a restanding booster. This kind of helps one of the problems that Liel has as far as like power, but I do think in the future we do kind of have to correct the deck's current over reliance on Idiras. Like I think we need to design more cards similar to Salvar Dragon that more generally just care about things in the bind zone. Maybe like for every two cards in the bind zone, it gains like 5 or 10k or something, or just like gets 5k if you have any card in the bind zone, That just seems like a place that the deck could go. Obviously, if they print a new version of Liel, this could also just correct some of the issues. I think one thing that has been mentioned is that like Liel herself doesn't give any of the cards power, so that could be a way to fix it in the future if they want to print a new form for Liel. It is very strange that like this is a deck that does not have the same kind of flexibility that something like, say, Reziel does. A lot of Reziel's cards gain power on attack in the case of, like, Nobia. So you have a card like Gigantic Masher, where it's like, any unit was placed on the rearguard circle by the ability of your Reziel, it gets 15k, and it's like, it's so strange that Liel's cards all have these, like, weird hoops to jump through. Like, Diana needs to be your other unit, like I think Salvar Dragon is meant to be our equivalent to Gigantic Masher, and it's like, but Salvar Dragon gets less power. So, like, it's weird. And then, of course, we have, like, Nobia for Reziel that gains power on attack. So it feels like Reziel has flexibility with how it gains its power. And then coming up in set 4, we have Alden that gives, like, power plus 10,000 and draws a card, you know. Liael can technically have a higher ceiling than either of those cards because of her divine skill. So, the divine skill gives you like a second vanguard attack and allows you to reset her on attack ability so that you can get like 6 attacks out of it. But Rezael and especially Alden have more consistent pressure because they can just make 5 attacks like all the time. Theoretically, if you set up your board in a certain way, Rezael can get to a point where instead of just calling a single column, you could go like grade 2, grade 1 for 5 attacks. That's not always correct, but you can do it. And Alden, he's going to have the grade 3 that can restand something when you call on top of it, but also he has the old grade 0 from his first wave of support that can restand something, as well as an order that lets you call another card from your hand. So it feels strange that the deck that has a higher floor with consistent 5 attacks gets to have the extra power and draw, but Liel, where you can only hit the ceiling of 6 attacks once, and like you kind of need to set it up a little bit where you need another copy of Liel in the drop zone, like doesn't get to gain any passive power. Uh, and of course, like Liel Amorta also has the ability to like buff up her front row, and she has the same ceiling on her divine skill with like skipping your opponent's turn and restanding your board, which effectively lets you make 6 attacks at once, with the like added wrinkle that in between attacks you can reset the power numbers. So yeah, it is like very frustrating to feel like the deck that I've currently latched onto has these like massive flaws that it feels like Bushiroad is not currently addressing, but maybe she will continue to stay relevant. It doesn't seem like future Hikari is necessarily going away in the anime just yet. And we're probably getting a few more seasons of Divine Z. I can't imagine the current conflict just being wrapped up all nice and neat by the end of this season. So hopefully, with future waves of support, Liel will find a way to address some of these flaws. Or, just like get a better new form that fixes the problem for us. Like, we still haven't seen the real Liel in lore. We have, like, Amorta is a copy of her from the future, and then we have Odium, which I think is the present version of Liel that was brought back to life, but it was brought back using the power of, like, a different timeline. The lore has gotten weird. There's also the possibility that the two Liels combine their powers and we get Majesty Lord Liel. Please give me this coke, Bushiroad. Thank you very much. But for now, I think that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed my vague ramblings for the little bit. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.